Here's the beginning of your 2,000-word story in a heartfelt narration style. I worked 3 jobs so my husband could build his company, then he left me for a younger woman. The day my husband told me he was leaving, I was standing in our kitchen wearing a grocery store uniform stained with coffee. I had just finished a 12-hour shift. My feet hurt, my back ached, and all I wanted was a hot shower and 6 hours of sleep before my next job started. Instead, I walked through the front door and found my husband sitting at the dining table with a woman young enough to be our daughter. At first, I thought she was a client, maybe an employee from his company, maybe someone helping organize an event. Then I saw the way she was holding his hand, and suddenly, everything inside me went cold. My husband looked up. His expression wasn't guilty, it wasn't ashamed. If anything, he looked relieved. "Linda," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Those 4 words changed my life. I stood there frozen, still holding a bag of groceries, still wearing my work badge, still believing I knew the man I'd spent 28 years loving. The young woman lowered her eyes. My husband squeezed her hand. And that's when I knew. Before he even said the words, before he explained anything, I already knew. I'm in love with someone else. The grocery bag slipped from my hand. An orange rolled across the floor. Nobody moved to pick it up. Nobody moved at all. For nearly 30 years, I had sacrificed everything for this man. Everything. And now he was replacing me like an old piece of furniture. My name is Linda Parker. I'm 56 years old. And for most of my adult life, I believed marriage meant helping each other build dreams. What I didn't realize was that sometimes you're the only one doing the building. When I met Jason, he was 27 years old and full of ambition. He had big ideas, big plans, big promises, but very little money. I was working as a receptionist at a small insurance company. He was trying to launch a software business from his tiny apartment. Most people laughed at him. I didn't. I believed in him. More importantly, I believed in us. We got married 2 years later. The first years were difficult. Money was always tight. Bills arrived faster than paychecks. There were months when we weren't sure how rent would get paid. But I never complained. Instead, I worked harder. When Jason's business needed money, I picked up a second job. When that wasn't enough, I found a third one. During the day I worked as a receptionist. Evenings I stocked shelves at a grocery store. Weekends I cleaned offices. For years, that became my life. Wake up, work, come home, sleep, repeat. Friends asked how I managed. The answer was simple: love. I loved my husband. I loved our future. Every extra hour I worked felt like an investment in the life we were creating together. Meanwhile, Jason poured himself into the company. Slowly, things began changing. His business started growing. 1 client became 10, 10 became 50, then 100. The company expanded. Employees were hired. Investors came calling. The little software startup became a serious business. I was proud of him. Every success felt like our success. Every achievement felt shared. At least that's what I thought. As the company grew, Jason changed. At first, the changes were subtle. Longer work hours, more business trips, more expensive suits, more conversations about money. Then came the parties, networking events, luxury hotels, private dinners with investors. I rarely attended. Someone had to keep working. Someone had to manage the house. Someone had to make sacrifices. That someone was always me. Whenever I mentioned spending time together, he had an excuse. The company needed him. The business came first. Just a few more years, he'd say. Then we'll enjoy life. I believed him. Again, and again, and again. 28 years of believing. 28 years of waiting. Then one afternoon I received a call from my doctor. The tests I'd taken the previous week showed a heart condition. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that changes were needed. Less stress, more rest, better care of myself. I remember sitting in my car after that appointment and crying. Not because I was scared. Because I was exhausted. For nearly 3 decades, I had spent every ounce of energy taking care of everyone else. I couldn't remember the last time I'd taken care of me. That evening I wanted to tell Jason. I wanted comfort, support, a hug. Instead, he canceled dinner because of another business meeting. I ate alone. Again. The next morning, I returned to work. 3 jobs had become 2 by then, but I was still working nearly 60 hours a week. The irony wasn't lost on me. My husband's company was now worth tens of millions. Yet I still worked long hours because that's what I'd always done. That's who I'd become. A woman who carried everyone else's burdens. Then came the day everything collapsed. The young woman sitting beside Jason introduced herself as Madison. She was 31 years old. 25 years younger than me. Beautiful, confident, successful. Everything social media celebrates. Everything society tells women they're competing against. Jason explained that they'd been together for almost a year. A year. While I worked. While I sacrificed. While I supported him. He was building a completely different life. The words barely registered. I felt numb. Like someone else's story was unfolding in front of me. Then he said something I'll never forget. People grow apart. Just 4 words. 4 words used to erase 28 years. 28 years of loyalty. 28 years of sacrifice. 28 years of believing in him. I looked around the kitchen. The house I'd maintained. The furniture I'd chosen. The memories I'd helped create. And suddenly I realized something. Everything in that room carried my fingerprints. The company might have been his. But the foundation beneath his success. That belonged to both of us. For weeks after the divorce announcement, I barely functioned. I went through motions. Work, sleep, repeat. Friends called. I ignored them. Family worried. I reassured them. But inside, I was broken. Not because Jason left. Because I had lost myself. Somewhere along the way, I'd become so focused on helping someone else succeed that I'd forgotten my own worth. One rainy afternoon, while sorting old boxes in the garage, I found a notebook. It was mine, from nearly 30 years earlier. Inside were goals, dreams, plans, things I'd wanted before life became about supporting someone else. I flipped through the pages. Photography, travel, community work, starting a scholarship program, writing, mentoring young women, dream after dream, buried beneath decades of sacrifice. I sat there for hours reading. And for the first time in months, I smiled. The woman who wrote those pages wasn't gone. She was still there, waiting. The following week, something unexpected happened. I received a letter. Not from Jason. Not from a lawyer. From a former employee of his company. The young man thanked me for helping him years earlier. Apparently, when he was struggling financially, I'd quietly paid for training courses that helped launch his career. I barely remembered doing it. But he remembered every detail. A few days later another message arrived. Then another. And another. People whose lives I'd touched over the years. A waitress I'd helped through college. A single mother I'd connected with resources. An intern I'd encouraged during difficult times. Stories I had forgotten. People who hadn't. One message stood out. A young woman named Rachel wrote that my kindness years earlier had inspired her to create a nonprofit organization helping women restart their lives after divorce. At the bottom of the letter was an invitation. She wanted me to visit. I almost declined. Then something told me to go. That decision would change everything. When I arrived, I expected a small office. Instead, I found hundreds of women receiving support. Career training, counseling, housing assistance, education programs, hope. Rachel greeted me with tears in her eyes. Then she introduced me to dozens of women whose lives had been transformed. One by one, they shared their stories. And as I listened, something inside me began healing. For years, I'd measured my value through sacrifice. Through what I gave others. Through how much I endured. But standing there, surrounded by people whose lives had improved because of simple acts of kindness, I finally saw a different truth. The most important things we build aren't companies. They're people. And while Jason had spent decades building a business empire, I had unknowingly spent decades building something entirely different. Something far more meaningful. Something that was still growing. Something that couldn't be taken away by divorce papers or broken promises. As I looked around the room, Rachel stepped forward and handed me a framed photograph. Inside was a picture of hundreds of women whose lives had been changed through the organization. Across the bottom was a simple inscription. For Linda, the woman who taught us that starting over is still moving forward. I stared at the photo. Then at the women smiling around me. And for the first time since my marriage ended, tears filled my eyes for a completely different reason. Because in that moment, I realized I hadn't lost everything. I was only beginning to discover what truly belonged to me. This is approximately 2,000 words of narration and stops before the final resolution, as requested.